One way or another, no matter which theory of our journey is correct, it's myself I address, to whom I rehearse as to a stranger our history and condition, and will disclose my secret, hope though I sink for it. Is the journey my invention? Do the night and the sea exist at all, I ask myself, apart from my experience of them? Do I myself exist, or is this a dream? Sometimes I wonder, and if I am who I am, the heritage I supposedly transport, but how can I be both vessel and contents? Such are the questions that beset my intervals of rest. My trouble is, I lack conviction. Many accounts of our situation seem plausible to me, where and what we are, why we swim and whither, but implausible ones as well, perhaps especially those I must admit as possibly correct, even likely. If at times, in certain humors, stroking in unison, say, with my neighbors, and chanting with them onward, upward, I have supposed that we have all a common Maker, whose nature and motives we may not know, but who engenders us in some mysterious wise and launched us forth towards some end known but to him, if for a mood's length only. I have been able to entertain such notions, very popular in certain quarters. It is because our night sea journey partakes of their absurdity. One might even say, I can believe them because they are absurd. Has that been said before? Another paradox. It appears to be these recesses from swimming that sustain me in the swim. 2 measures onward and upward flailing with the rest. Then I float exhausted and dispirited, brood upon the night, the sea, the journey, while the flood bears me a measured back and down. Slow progress, but I live, and make my way, I, past many a drowned comrade in the end, stronger, worthier than I, victims of their unremitting joie de nager. I have seen the best swimmers of my generation go under, numberless the number of the dead, thousands drowned as I think this thought, millions as I rest before returning to the swim, and scores, hundreds of millions have expired since we surged forth, brave in our innocence upon our dreadful way. Love, love, we sang then, 250,000,000 strong, and churned the warm sea white with joy of swimming. Now all are gone down, the buoyant, the sodden, leaders and followers, all gone under, while wretched I swim on. Yet these same reflective intervals that keep me afloat have led me into wonder, doubt, despair, strange emotions for a swimmer, have led me even to suspect that our night sea journey is without meaning. Indeed, if I have yet to join the hosts of the suicides, it is because, fatigue apart, I find it no meaningfuller to drown myself than to go swimming. I know that there are those who seem actually to enjoy the night sea, who claim to love swimming for its own sake, or sincerely believe that reaching the shore, transmitting the heritage, whose heritage, I'd like to know, and to whom, is worth that staggering cost. I do not. Swimming itself I find at best not actively unpleasant, but more often tiresome, not infrequently a torment. Arguments from function and design don't impress me, granted that we can and do swim, that in a manner of speaking our long tails and streamlined heads are meant for swimming. It by no means follows, for me at least, that we should swim, or otherwise endeavor to fulfill our destiny, which is to say, someone else's destiny, since ours, so far as I can see, is merely to perish, one way or another, soon or late. The heartless zeal of our departed leaders, like the blind ambition and good cheer of my own youth, appalls me now. For the death of my comrades I am inconsolable. If the night sea journey has justification, it is not for us swimmers ever to discover it. Oh, to be sure, love, one heard on every side. Love it is that drives and sustain us. I translate. We don't know what drives and sustains us, only that we most miserably driven and imperfectly sustained. We are, that is. Love is how we call our ignorance of what whips us. To reach the shore then, but what if the shore exists in the fancies of us swimmers merely, who dream it to account for the dreadful fact that we swim, have always and only swum, and continue swimming without respite, myself excepted, until we die. Supposing even that there were a shore that, as a cynical companion of mine once imagined, we rise from the drowned to discover all those vulgar superstitions and exalted metaphors to be literal truth, the giant maker of us all, the shores of light beyond our night sea journey. Whatever would a swimmer do there? The fact is, when we imagine the shore, what comes to mind is just the opposite of our condition. No more night, no more sea, no more journeying. In short, the blissful estate of the drowned. Ours not to stop and think, ours but to swim and sink. But a moment's thought reveals the pointlessness of swimming. No matter. I've heard some say, even as they gulped their last. The night sea journey may be absurd, but here we swim, we will, nil we. Against the flood, onward and upward, toward a shore that may not exist and couldn't be reached if it did. The thoughtful swimmer's choices, then they say, are two: give over thrashing and go under for good, or embrace the absurdity, affirm in and for itself the night sea journey, swim on with neither motive nor destination for the sake of swimming, and compassionate, moreover, with your fellow swimmer. We being all at sea and equally in the dark, I find neither course acceptable, if not the hypothetical shore can justify a sea full of drowned comrades. To speak of the swim in itself as somehow doing so strikes me as obscene. I continue to swim, but only because blind habit, blind instinct, blind fear of drowning are still more strong than the horror of our journey. And if on occasion I have assisted a fellow thrasher, joined in the cheers and songs, even passed along to other strokes of genius from the drowned great, it's that I shrink by temperament from making myself conspicuous. To paddle off in one's own direction, assert one's independent right of way, overrun one's fellows without compunction, or dedicate oneself entirely to pleasures and diversions without regard for conscience. I can't finally condemn those who journey in this wise. In half my moods I envy them, and despise the weak vitality that keeps me from following their example. But in reasonabler moments, I remind myself that it's their freedom and self-responsibility I reject, as more dramatically absurd, in our senseless circumstances, than tailing along in conventional fashion, suicides, rebels, affirmers of the paradox, naysayers and yea-sayers, alike in our fatal journey. I finally shake my head at them, and splash, sighing, past their corpses, one by one, as past 100 sorts of others, friends, enemies, brothers, fools, sages, brutes, and nobodies, millions upon million. I envy them all. A poor irony, that I, who findest abhorrent and tautological the doctrine of survival of the fittest, fitness meaning, in my experience, nothing more than survivability, a talent whose only demonstration is the fact of survival, but whose chief ingredients seem to be strength, guile, and callousness, may be the sole remaining swimmer. But the doctrine is false, as well as repellent. Chance drowns the worthy with the unworthy, bears up the unfit with the fit, by whatever definition, and makes the night sea journey essentially haphazard as well as murderous and unjustified. You only swim once. Why bother then? Except ye drowned, ye shall not reach the shore of life. Poppycock. One of my late companions, that same cynic with the curious fancy among the first to drown, entertained us with odd conjectures while we waited to begin our journey. A favorite theory of his was that the Father does not exist, and did and did indeed make us. In the sea we swim, but not a purpose, or even consciously. He made us, as it were, despite himself. As we will make waves with every tail thrash, and may be unaware of our existence. Another was that he knows we're here, but doesn't care what happens to us inasmuch as he creates, voluntarily or not. Other seas and swimmers at more or less regular intervals, in bitterer moments, such as just before he drowned my friend, he even supposed that our Maker wished us unmade. There was indeed a shore, he'd argue, which could save at least some of us from drowning, and towards which it was our function to struggle, but for reasons unknowable to us. He wanted desperately to prevent our reaching that happy place and fulfilling our destiny. Our Father, in short, was our adversary and would-be killer, no less outrageous and offensive to traditional opinion were the fellow's speculations on the nature of our Maker. That he might well be no swimmer himself at all, but some sort of monstrosity, perhaps even tailless. That he might be stupid, malicious, insensible, perverse, or asleep and dreaming. That the end for which he created and launched us forth, and which we flagelated ourselves to fathom, was perhaps immoral, even obscene, etc., etc. There was no end to the chap's conjectures, or to the impoliteness of his fancy. I have reason to suspect that his early demise, whether planned by our Maker or not, was expedited by certain fellow swimmers, indignant at his blasphemies. In other moods, however, he was given to moods as I. His theorizing would become half serious, so it seemed to me, especially upon the subjects of fate and immortality, to which our youthful conversations often turned. Then his harangues, if no less fantastical, grew solemn and obscure, and if he was still baiting us, his passion undid the joke. His objection to popular opinions of the hereafter, he would declare, was their claim to general validity. Why did believers hold that all the drowned rise to be judged at journey's end, and non-believers that drowning is final without exception? In his opinion, so he'd vow at least, nearly everyone's fate was permanent death. Indeed, he took a sour pleasure in supposing that every Maker made thousands of separate seas in his creative lifetime, each populated like ours with millions of swimmers, and that in almost every instance both sea and swimmers were utterly annihilated, whether accidentally or by malevolent design. Nothing, if not pluralistical. He imagined there might be millions and billions of fathers, perhaps some night sea of their own. However, and here he turned infidels against him. With the faithful he professed to believe that in possibly a single night sea per thousand, say one of its 250,000,000 swimmers, that is, one swimmer in 250 billions, achieved a qualified immortality. In some cases, the rate might be slightly higher, in others it was vastly lower, for just as there are swimmers of every degree of proficiency, including some who drown before the journey starts, unable to swim at all, and others created drowned as it were, so he imagined what he can only be termed impotent creators, makers unable to make, as well as uncommonly fertile ones in all grades between, and it pleased him to deny any necessary relation between a maker's productivity and his other virtues, including even the quality of his creatures. I could go on, he surely did, with his elaboration of these mad notions, such as the swimmers in other night seas needn't be of our kind, that makers themselves might belong to different species, so to speak, that our particular maker mightn't himself be immortal, or that we might be not only his emissaries, but his immortality continuing, his life and our own, transmogrified beyond our individual deaths. Even this modified immortality, meaningless to me, he conceived as relative and contingent, subject to accidental or deliberate termination. His pet hypothesis was this: makers and swimmers each generate the other against all odds, their number being so great that any given immortality chain could terminate after any number of cycles, so that what was immortal, still speaking relatively, was only the cyclic process of incarnation, which itself might have a beginning and an end. Alternatively, he liked to imagine cycles within cycles, either finite or infinite. For example, the night sea, as it were, in which makers swam and created night seas, and swimmers like ourselves might be the creation of a larger maker, himself one of many, who in turn, etc. Time itself he regarded as relative to our experience, like magnitude. Who knew but what, with each thrash of our tails, minuscule seas and swimmers' whole eternities came to pass, as ours perhaps and our makers' was elapsing between the strokes of some super tale in a slower order of time. Naturally I hooted with the others at this nonsense. We were young then, and had only the dimmest notion of what lay ahead. In our ignorance we imagined night sea journeying to be a positively heroic enterprise. Its meaning and value we never questioned. To be sure, some must go down by the way, a pity no doubt, but to win a race requires that others lose, and like all my fellows I took for granted that I would be the winner. We milled and swarmed, impatient to be off, never mind where or why, only to try our youth against the realities of night and sea. If we indulged the skeptic at all, it was as a droll, half contemptible mascot. When he died in the initial slaughter, no one cared. And even now I don't subscribe to all his views, but I no longer scoff. The horror of our history has purged me of its opinions, as of vanity, confidence, spirit, charity, hope, vitality, everything, except dull dread and a kind of melancholy, stunned persistence. What leads me to recall his fancies is my growing suspicion that I, of all swimmers, may be the sole survivor of this fell journey, tale-bearer of a generation. This suspicion, together with the recent sea change suggests to me now that nothing is impossible, not even my late companion's wildest visions, and brings me to a certain desperate resolve, the point of my chronicling. Very likely, I have lost my senses. The carnage at our setting out, our decimation by whirlpool, poisoned cataract, sea convulsion, the panic stampedes, mutinies, slaughters, mass suicides, the mounting evidence that none will survive the journey. Add to these anguish and fatigue. It were a miracle if sanity were stayed afloat. Thus I admit, with the other possibilities, that the present sweetening and calming of the sea, and what seems to be a kind of vasty presence, song, or summons from the near upstream, may be hallucinations of disordered sensibility. Perhaps even I am drowned already. Surely I was never meant for the rough and tumble of the swim. Not impossibly I perished at the outset, and have only imaged the night sea journey from some final deep. In any case, I am no longer young, and it is we spent old swimmers, disabused of every illusion, who are most vulnerable to dreams. Sometimes I think I am my drowned friend. Out with it. I've begun to believe not only that she exists, but that she lies not far ahead, and stills the sea and draws me hereward. Aghast, I recollect his maddest notion, that our destination, which existed, mine, in but one night sea out of hundreds of thousands, was no shore as commonly conceived, but a mysterious being, indescribable except by paradox and vaguest figure, wholly different from us swimmers, yet our complement, the death of us, yet our salvation and resurrection, simultaneously our journey's end, midpoint and commencement, not membered and thrashing like us, but a motionless or hugely gliding sphere of unimaginable dimension, self-contained, yet dependent absolutely in some wise upon the chance, always monstrously improbable, that one of us will survive the night sea journey and reach her. Her, he called it, or she, which is to say, other than a he. I shake my head. The thing is too preposterous. It is myself I talk to. To keep my reason in this awful darkness. There is no she. There is no you. I rave to myself. It's death alone that hears and summons. To the drowned, all seas are calm. Listen. My friend maintained that in every order of creation there are two sorts of creators, contrary yet complementary, one of which gives rise to seas and swimmers, the other to the night which contains the sea, and to what waits at the journey's end, the former, in short, to destiny, the latter to destination. And both profligately, and both profligately, involuntarily, perhaps, indifferently, or unwittingly. The purpose of the night sea journey, but not necessarily of the journeyer or of either maker, my friend, could be described only in abstractions, consummation, transfiguration, union of contraries, transcension of categories. When we laughed, he would shrug and admit that he understood the business no better than we, and thought it ridiculous, dreary, possibly obscene. But one of you, he'd add with his wry smile, may be the hero destined to complete the night sea journey and be one with her. Chances are, of course, you won't make it. He himself, he declared, was not even going to try. The whole idea repelled him. If we chose to dismiss it as an ugly fiction, so much the better for us. Thrash, splash, and be merry. We were soon enough drowned. But there it was. He could not say how he knew or why he bothered to tell us, any more than he could say what would happen after. She and hero, shore and swimmer, merged into entities, to become something both and neither. He quite agreed with me that if the issue of the magical union had no memory of the night sea journey, for example, it enjoyed a poor sort of immortality, even poorer if, as he rather imagined, a swimmer hero plus a she equaled or became merely another maker of future night seas, and the rest at such incredible expenses of life. This being the case, he was persuaded it was the merciful thing to do was refuse to participate. The genuine heroes, in his opinion, were the suicides, and the hero of heroes would be the swimmer who, in the very presence of the other, refused her preferred immortality, and thus put an end to at least one cycle of catastrophes. How we mocked him. Our moment came. We hurtled forth, pretending to glory in the adventure, thrashing, singing, cursing, strangling, rationalizing, rescuing, killing, inventing rules and stories and relationships, giving up, struggling on, but dying all, and still in darkness, until only a battered remnant was left to croak, onward, upward, like a bitter echo. Then they too fell silent, victims, I can only presume, of the last frightful wave. And the moment came when I also, utterly desolate and spent, thrashed my last and gave myself over to the current, to sink or float, as might be, but swim no more. Whereupon, marvelous to tell, in an instant the sea grew still, then warmly, gently, the great tide turned, began to bear me, as it does now, onward and upward, will I, nil I, like a flood of joy, and I recalled with dismay my dead friends' teaching. I am not deceived. This new emotion is her doing. The desire that possesses me is her bewitchment. Lucidity passes from me. In a moment I'll cry, love, bury myself in her side, and be transfigured. Which is to say, I die already. This fellow transported by passion is not I. I am he who abjures and rejects the night sea journey. I am all love. Come, she whispers, and I have no will. You who I may be about to become, whatever you are, with the last twitch of my real self, I beg you to listen. It is not love that sustains me. No, though her magic makes me burn to sing to the contrary. And though I drown even now for the blasphemy, I will say the truth. What has fetched me across this dreadful sea is a single hope, a gift of my poor dead comrade, that you may be stronger willed than I, and that by sheer force of concentration I may transmit to you, along with your official heritage, a private legacy of awful recollection and negative resolve. Mad as it may be, my dream is that some unimaginable embodiment of myself, or myself plus her, if that's how it must be, will come to find itself expressing, in however garbled or radical a translation, some reflection of these reflections. If against all odds this comes to pass, may you, through whom I speak, do what I cannot, terminate this aimless, brutal business, stop your hearing against her song, hate love, still alive, afloat, a fire, farewell, then my penultimate hope, that one may be sunk for direst blasphemy on the very shore of the shore. Can it be, my old friend would smile, that that only utterest naysayers survive the night? But even that were sense. But even that were sense, and there is no sense, only senseless love, senseless death. Whoever echoes these reflections, be more courageous than their author, and even to the night sea journeys, make no more, and forswear me when I shall forswear myself, deny myself, plunge into her who summons, singing, love, love, love.